Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central TV, the show where we bring you the latest political updates and happenings around the continent. I am Benga Aboroa.
And I'm Rita Omodia. Today's edition of The Conversation promises to be really revealing, as yesterday we saw a series of events happening in the political scene, talking about where we have a recent coup in Guinea-Bissau and, of course, the state capture in South Africa. So that will be our focus for today's edition of The Conversation. And we begin in South Africa, where investigators have revealed and released a 646-page report detailing how rampant corruption under former President Jacob Zuma undermined both the public logistics company Transnet and the state-owned firms Denel. The report is a second of an expected 3 volumes drafted by a special commission headed by Interim Constitutional Court Chief Justice Raymond Zondo.
The first volume was delivered in early January and dealt with corruption at national carriers, South African Airways, the country's tax collector, and public procurement. In a separate case, former President Jacob Zuma is also facing 16 charges of fraud, graft and racketeering relating to a 1999 purchase of military equipment from 5 European arms companies when he was deputy president. Ramaphosa has said that the report from the commission painted a deeply disturbing picture of how key institutions were compromised and undermined by criminal intent. Today on The Conversation, we have Pethani Matsvidandila, a Pan-Africanist and historian and activist. We also have joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa, Ricky Naidu, the Chief Content Officer at the African News Agency. Gentlemen, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you
Good evening,
for tonight on this very good conversation.
I'd like to start with you, Ricky. The Zondo Commission report presented an intricate and fascinating account of how 3 public entities, South African Airways, the government's information arm, the GCIS, and the South African Revenue Service, SARS, were systematically captured with criminal intent, and how misinformation of both through the diversion of public funds to a puppet media organization. Does the damning Zondo inquiry represent an indictment of South Africa's public institutions? And what is the current state of some of these institutions that I mentioned earlier, GCIS, South African Airways, and the others?
Thank you. I think the first point I'd like to make is, of course, the report that you are referring to is the first volume, which was handed over to the president at the beginning of January. Yesterday, we had the second volume. It's a 3-part report, and we had the second part of the report that was handed over to the presidency yesterday. Those 2 reports focuses on state-owned enterprises, SA, you correctly point out, Eskom, the power utility, and GCIS. The report that was handed over yesterday focuses on 2 other key institutions, in fact, a hub of a lot of what you call state capture, Transnet and Denel, the arms manufacturing company. But I think it's important also to put into context the whole issues around the Zondo Commission and its investigation into state capture. The investigations into corruption and state capture, etc., actually has its seeds long before what Ramaphosa calls the 10 wasted years. In fact, it started off in your introduction, you spoke about the controversial arms deal. And I think it goes back as far as that. But the terms of reference for the Zondo Commission was limited to the so-called 10 wasted years. And it's a very intricate network. At the center of the network in terms of the Zondo probe is, of course, the focus on public institutions. But it's not just the public institutions, it's a network of public institutions, public officials, and the role of the private sector in enabling state capture.
Okay, now I'll go over to you, Pethani now. Ricky, you mentioned so much about the revelations from the Zondo report, and according to a particular line there, it said it was a pattern of racketeering. Now, Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, who chaired the inquiry, proposed new legislation that makes abuse of public power illegal. He suggested offenders should be jailed for up to 20 years or fined 200 million rands or both. Now, did South Africa need a Zondo report to indict those mentioned in the report, or are the extant laws inadequate?
Thank you. But as you have mentioned already, that some of the recommendations from Judge Zondo specifically speak about that maybe we must introduce a special kind of legislation to punish the perpetrators. But that is not really a solution to the crisis that we are facing in the country, because really, in reality, is that state infrastructures and state institutions have been used by those who were in power in the past 10 years and have completely really collapsed to an extent that, especially when you look at our railway system, you might have seen some news reports that it is completely debilitated. So the reality is that the laws that we have in the country already have proven to be inadequate to deal with the people that have captured the state, primarily because whatever people who are in power at the time, they always use state institutions like the NPA and especially the judiciary to not prosecute those who are their political allies or their friends. So in reality, it is less of a legal, although it is much more of a legal conundrum, but it is also largely also on a political problem that faces the country, that the leadership of the country has been caught in the so-called state capture. And I deliberately call it so-called state capture because I don't really believe that there's been a state capture in South Africa, as alleged by the Guptas and the presidency of the Zuma for 10 years. In actual fact, the capture of the state in South Africa began on the first day that Jan van Riebeeck landed in the shores of South Africa, and that has been complete capturing of the state by the settler minority. And the people who tried to capture the state, of course, there was attempts to try to capture the state in the 10 years when Zuma was in power. The problem that they encounter is that they try to capture a state which was already captured by other people, and those who had captured the state before and have now risen up in arms and said that, look at those ones, they want to capture the state, when in reality the state has been captured for a very long time. As Ricky has already mentioned, that what is the role that private sector has played in making sure that in facilitating that the state resources have been plundered. And this, we know that people who are largely owners of private sector in South Africa are the white minority.
Thank you very much, Pathani. Now, back to you, Ricky. The Zondo Commission, actually, the report reads like a playbook on how to corrupt the government. The commission has constructed a disturbing picture of the deaths and damage of the state capture. How much has changed since those 10 wasted years, as some people have put it, and this years where former President Jacob Zuma was in power? What is the extent of the damage that was done, and is anything being done to tackle this endemic corruption?
Well, the point is, since President Zuma had left the presidential office, just immediately after he had left office and, during the COVID pandemic, at the height of the COVID pandemic, under President Ramaphosa's administration, the corruption, which, has a multi-billion rand corruption in the whole procurement of PPEs and a whole range of other issues related to providing or plundering resources that was intended to help the poorest of the poor to deal with the pandemic. So you see the issue about the 10 wasted years becomes a kind of a tired mantra. And the issue about dealing with corruption in a very fundamental way, there's not much progress in that context. And if you put it into the context of, for example, the Zondo Commission, these very lengthy reports running into hundreds of pages, a lot of recommendations, and a lot of it has been, and we must remember the Zondo Commission, there were very high expectations, but it came at a huge cost. Initially the Zondo Commission was supposed to be sitting for, I think if I'm correct, for a maximum of 6 months. but it lost its way along the process of its work. One, the cost to the fiscus ratcheted up to more than R1 billion. Now the question is, what is the return of the investment, for the taxpayer in that R1 billion? And in the context of the recommendations, and the question you posed to my colleague earlier, in terms of introducing new legislation, etc., I don't think that's the point. South Africa has a legislative framework, with existing mechanisms that can, that enabling mechanisms that can deal with the issues of corruption and malfeasance. So you don't need another new institution. For example, in one of the recommendations in the current volume of the report, the second report, Justice Zondo proposes an anti-corruption agency. That's not necessary. What is necessary is the issues around, when you talk state capture, for example, the state of the security cluster, the police service, the National Prosecuting Authority, the corruption is very deep in that context. And to come back to your original point, how much has changed? Very little has changed in that context.
Okay, Ricky, you mentioned very little has changed since the Zuma years, and you also mentioned the huge cost of the inquiry. So let's hear from Pethani now. Do you feel this was worth the time, effort, and expense? And I know that we're still waiting for the third volume of the report, but do you see the recommendations being followed by the Zuma administration?
To be honest, South Africa is a country of commission. This is the 10th year of the Marikana massacre in one of our provinces in Northwest. And the recommendations from the Zondo Commission have not been followed. We have had so many commissions in the country that it's just a waste of taxpayers' money. As Ricky was mentioning now that the cost of the Zondo Commission is inflated up to R1 billion. And what in material gains of the citizens is that going to be, as we've watched this spectacle for the past 4 years, when we are trying to understand what really is state capture, because we have not really gotten to the core of what really was state capture and who captured the state, and for whose benefit. What we have is those who have been fingered, and in real terms, it is that if the faction that Ramaphosa, the president of Ramaphosa belongs to, loses the conference of the ANC, I hardly see that those recommendations being followed, because remember, at the end of the day, it's about who's driving the political will and whom do they want to reach at. So in reality, even before the commission said, one of the points of debate, which was very frustrating, was what are the terms of reference when we speak about the state of capture, because it does not really start or end when Zuma was in the presidency, and when he left, it didn't end there and it didn't begin there. So the terms of reference also was something that was also a controversial issue or a controversial decision to be taken, and that was not honestly or honestly dealt with, and that has left so many questions and holes that people are questioning. And in reality, I don't see any of the recommendations that are being put forward or completely being followed to the book as Judge Zondo has proposed. It has really been the trend in South Africa that we sit for commissions, we go and perform our pain that we have lost this much and much. I mean, even the recommendation of the TRC in 1996, nothing has been followed through, and we still have apartheid criminals working in our country. So in reality, the victims of the Marikana massacre still today, this year will be coming in the 10th year since the Marikana massacre. There was a Zondo Commission which said nothing has been done, and we also had the live estimating commission which said 2 years ago nothing has been done. I don't see anything coming out of the Zondo Commission rather than just a political spectacle and trying to act as if something is being done, whereas in reality nothing is being done.
Okay, Pethani, staying with you, you seem to mention a culture of not following up on recommendations and reports, that they just gather dust and power. Now, I want to take you up on something you mentioned earlier in your opening submission. You said the bigger state capture is from the white minority, and everybody talks about how unequal things are in South Africa. That's a different story for another day. But just to get you clear, just to get your thoughts on this, and I really want you to explain your points. Does the corruption that is happening under the ANC excuse state capture? Is it excused because it's the minority that have economic powers? That are you going to overlook ANC corruption?
No, 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 no. And normally in some quarters, people like to say that, oh no, because they are black people, we will deal with them.
Yes.
Family, we will deal with them on the side. No, in fact, we are saying that we're even throwing them to the dogs. Even those who were entrusted by the votes of black people that fought so much for this country. And when they were put in power, they continued to do the same thing which was being done by the white minority in the country. What we're essentially saying is that whatever judgment is going to be passed in the last 10 years of those who captured the state under the presidency of Jacob Zuma, it must not, no stone must be left unturned. It must be from the presidency of Jacob Zuma going backwards to everyone who has deprived the African people of this country their rightful economic share in this country. So we are saying, even though if they are black, we are throwing them to the dogs and they must face the music because they have also contributed to our misery.
Okay, now, Ricky, Pathani talked about recommendations not being followed following the report. Now, are there or will there be political consequences for the ANC party, that is the ruling party? I mean, people right now are seeing a lot of revelations. I said earlier on, they're still waiting for the third part of the report, but people are seeing lots of corruption going on under the ANC ruling party. So will there be political consequences in terms of the people having so much interest in this ruling party?
Absolutely. I mean, just last year in November, we had the latest round of local government elections. And it was a very clear message from the electorate that, the issues around corruption and maladministration, et cetera, with the ruling party, it paid a very heavy price at the polls. For the first time, in local government elections, the ANC dipped just below 50%. It's lost control of all of the major economic hubs in the country, Cape Town, in this election, Johannesburg, Tshwane, and many others. And, so the electorate gave, and the traditional electorate or the traditional ANC supporters gave the party a very clear message that, it's not business as usual. In just over under 2 years, we'll be having another election. That's the national election. And I'm pretty certain that, given all of this combination of issues within the ruling party, that the electorate is going to make its voice heard again. Right now, South Africa, from a leadership point of view, particularly the ANC, which came into power on this very high moral high ground, Nelson Mandela, the struggle against apartheid, etc. Now the struggle dividend is now nothing, the ANC cannot bank on that any longer because the hard and fast issues is the state of our economy. The triple burden of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, that gap has widened quite substantially at the expense of all of this malfeasance. And I think we also must look at also the issues, and this is a very critical year again. The ruling party is going to be having another elective conference. The factional battles within the ANC has now dominated, the progress of our democracy. The state capture issues are a very central part of those issues. And, the way forward is a very difficult path. And I'm not convinced, and I think Patani touched on it, with the number of commissions that we've experienced from the Truth Commission to the commission into the arms deal, the Farlam Commission into the Marikana massacre. Very little dividends have come out of the huge cost. Now the question is moving forward, because what we must also keep in mind is the findings or the recommendations of the Zondo Commission is subject to review. Every person that's implicated, including former President Zuma, has a right to review these findings that's made by Acting Chief Justice Zondo in the courts. Now, if you're talking about the progress in terms of implementation, I cannot see it, most certainly not in the next few years. There might be some low-hanging fruit, but the bigger issues, I can't see major prosecutions, etc., happening in that context. And then the question we're going to ask ourselves, sorry, the last point is again, was this commission at 1 billion rand worth the exercise? Or should these issues have just simply been dealt with at that point in time, by the law enforcement agency, if there was issues around corruption and malfeasance?
Now, staying with you, Riki, the Zondo Commission, you just mentioned lower hanging fruits and prosecutions. The Zondo Commission highlighted Zuma's role in state capture and in advancing the interest of the Guptas and his family at the expense of, at the interest of South Africans, ordinary South Africans. Now, the Guptas were the poster boys or the poster child for state capture. They envisioned everything that had to do with state capture. I remember the Guptas' guest arriving at Waterkloof, the presidential airport in South Africa. They were running the show, basically. What's the current situation with them? Are there talks of, I understand they're not in the country, are there talks of extraditing them, or is anyone talking about the Guptas facing some kind of justice?
Well, again, that's the key point. You see, one of the biggest players in the whole state capture process has been the Guptas and their associates. The Guptas are now sitting reportedly in Dubai. Others are reporting that they've now moved their base to, I think, Kazakhstan or one of the Eastern European countries. But the issue is in terms of the extradition. There's simply been no progress on the extradition of the Guptas back to South Africa. And I doubt that's very much is going to happen. If it does happen, it's a long process. To hold them accountable for their own role in state capture, we'll need the cooperation of, for example, the Emiratis or the Emirates, where they are now in Dubai. And there's a lot of obstacles, but also the way the prosecution authority and the Ministry of Justice has handled the whole extradition process. There's been a number of issues raised about, the process that they follow, and, which has contributed to the delays. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's now, more than 15 years. The Guptas left the country, about 8-9 years ago. And the extradition processes are nowhere near conclusion.
What about Jacob Zuma, who is the leading figure in this corruption trial? We know that there's been different tactics on him returning back to prison. Now, with this report, do you think he will be tried and sent back to prison? If we remember, there were several riots that went on in South Africa following the declaration of him going back to prison. So do you see any chances of him going back to prison?
Well, we must firstly remember that all of the issues in the Zondo Commission does not have any prosecuting authority. It's a commission of inquiry. It can merely make recommendations. So its recommendations, and all of its recommendations so far is about the prosecuting and law enforcement agencies conducting further investigation. Now, the issue for me is at the end of the day is whether former President Zuma and his whoever he worked with is charged. We're a long way from it because, as I said earlier, he has a right, to challenge the findings and the recommendations. Now, it's well documented also the relationship President Zuma has had with the Zondo Commission. Bar the one appearance where he answered a few questions, and then subsequently, which then ended up him being, sentenced to a 3-month prison term for contempt of the commission. All of those matters, gives you a very clear indication that we are very far down the line, far away from even talking about charging, even if they do charging. And for example, the other people that are involved, for example, the CEOs or former CEOs of the state-owned enterprises, that those processes will have to be subjected first on the outcomes of the reviews if they decide to challenge these reports. And remember, there's a third part of the report.
Yes.
And what I would then call a political part of the report. Because President Ramaphosa himself, had to answer some very hard questions, and he didn't really provide answers, when he appeared before the Zondo Commission. And all of these things are going to be spilling over into the current toxic political space that we find ourselves in the country.
Thank you, Ricky. I'd like to bring in Pathani here. President Ramaphosa himself has said that if he's indicted, he will step aside. And he said that there was pushback within the ruling African National Congress Party over the state capture report, knowing that the indictment, this corruption happened under an ANC government. He's also a member of the ANC. My question to you, Pathani, is this. President Cyril Ramaphosa has come out to say it is the end of state capture and the era of state capture in South Africa. Going forward, we did see that because of all these corruption scandals and a lot of disgruntlement between the populace and the ANC, they did lose some ground in the last elections. Going forward, do you think Black South Africans will still rally behind the ANC, or is the era of post-apartheid and freedom fighting nostalgia over? Do you think it's time to look for another political party that will drive the aspirations of Black people in South Africa?
I think if we are to look at the last polls, it will be telling of the mood of the voters in the country, that they kind of have arrived at a crossroads with the ANC, that mostly in the metro, that most of them have not been voting for the ANC, they've voted for other parties, and the ANC seems to have lost ground. But in reality, is that the problem with unseating the ANC will be difficult in the sense that the ANC is a cultural organization in South Africa. Essentially, that most people's relation to politics is about the ANC and their role in the struggle. So it will be very hard to dismantle it. But also at the same time, it has kind of shifted towards being a rural party. Like, for example, in the province where I am right now, Limpopo, it's won by a landslide margin of over 80%, So it's just like many other liberty movements. It's a sort of like following the same trend where it turns into become a rural party where it is voted by the elderly people in the villages and in the less developed part of the country. So there seems to be a shift in the sense that the ANC is losing ground, but the vacuum that the ANC is going to leave, who can fill it? But also, there's been slow growth of the EFF, what I would call the fastest growing party in the country, that was formed by Julius Malema, of course, after he was expelled from this very same ANC. And the DA still holds second spot in terms of number of polls, but it is telling that at the trajectory that the EFF is going, it can cover some ground and also be able to dismantle the ANC. But dismantling the ANC completely will be something that will take a long time. Not saying that they're going to lose in majority, but what we have seen, the trends that have been growing, especially in local government elections, that it is most municipalities are governed by coalitions. So the future seems to be that we might be looking into coalition governments, as we have seen in other democracies, in other countries. That is seemingly what the future of the politics in the country will be. But also at the same time, there's also, there was a surprising rise of a party that was formed recently, the one with Herman Mashaba, the former mayor of Joburg, which mostly its political rhetoric was mostly based around xenophobic point of view and anti-migration policies. So those are the kind of conflicts and contradictions that are happening in the political landscape in the country, when Black South Africans are frustrated by the ANC. Instead of looking at real solutions, what is coming out at the fore is that the first thing to point is the foreigners whom they are so-called saying that they're taking their jobs. So these are some of the political standpoints or some political ways in which other political parties are using to gather people and gather masses. But all in all, I don't see the ANC regaining majority in the coming national elections, and it will not be a landslide. So I'm predicting that it's going to be a coalition government. If it's not in 2024, it will be in the next national election.
Thanks, Pathani.
Okay, Ricky, following what Pathani said, he said South Africa moving towards an era of coalition government following a displeasure and, of course, a lack of confidence coming from the people due to corruption allegations within the ANC ruling party. Do you believe that we're moving towards an era of coalition government in South Africa?
I think Pathani is absolutely on the mark, in terms of his analysis, because, I mean, the pattern, you could see the pattern in the last few years, in the last few elections, where they, from the heady days of 1994, the majority that the ANC gained at the polls has gradually declined to the point where what we saw last year in the local government elections. And now with the next national and provincial elections, again, I don't think the ANC is going to get any decisive majority, and it will probably be forced into co-governing like we are seeing in many of the major metros in the country. I think the other issue is also, the ANC is also a shadow of itself, and this is where the state capture issues come in. Even before the so-called 10 wasted years, the public sector and the public entities were a very good conduit for money to be used to fund party activities. Until the very recent promulgation of legislation governing political party funding. Now, once that legislation kicked in, what you're seeing is the ANC now, its ability to compete with this limitless pool of resources is not there anymore. Right now, it can't pay the salaries of its workers. This is you're talking about the ruling party. Now, also the other factor over and above corruption is the whole issue about service delivery. The things that matters to people besides corruption, yes, people are extremely concerned, but 28 years into democracy, we are still grappling with very basic things, like the provision of water, sanitation, proper education, housing. Now, those are all of the factors that are going to impact, and I think people are tired of the promises. Next week, the president will be, Ramaphosa will be delivering yet another State of the Nation address, where he's going to outline, his administration's program. Of course, you are going to hear a lot more promises, how we are going to be, eliminating corruption, how government is going to be, accelerating service delivery. All of that, people are used to that. South Africans are used to that. And the majority of South Africans, the harsh reality is still live under the yoke of, poverty and, inequality. The unemployment rate is rocketed through the roof. Now, those are the factors that are going to count, at the next elections, despite all of the promises, by the ruling party and President Ramaphosa, that they have turned a new leaf, particularly with the Zondo Commission process. But I don't think people are going to be fooled so easily this time around.
Thank you very much, Ricky. Final question, Pathani. Just in 30 seconds, President Ramaphosa, on receiving this report, said it will be the end of state capture in South Africa, and it was under his government that he instituted the Zondo Commission. It was under his government that legislation was passed on political party financing. Do you see him as an anti-corruption champion? And is this the end of state capture in South Africa, Pathani?
No, the answer is a resounding no, that I don't believe that he is the champion of anti-corruption in the country. And also, it's just rhetoric, but also he has some of allegations that he has to answer himself, especially the funding of his campaign on becoming the president of the ANC and ultimately the president of the country. So those are some of the hanging things that are hanging on his head that have not been answered to. And himself being a billionaire and a capitalist, he cannot be a real good model of anti-corruption, as we know that his wealth is amassed through the massive exploitation of the working class in the country. So in reality, we cannot really put Ramaphosa as a person or a model that is supposed to be ending corruption. What we are just getting is just political rhetoric and really nothing at all, and in the sense of real concrete evidence that the ANC is really serious about approaching corruption in the country.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much, Pathani. We would like to say a very big thank you to you, gentlemen, Ricky Naidu and Pathani Mazvendila. Thanks for joining us on the conversation today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, you're watching the conversation in News Central Television, where we'll return. We'll be talking about the attempted coup in Guinea-Bissau. Stay with us. You're welcome back to the conversation here on News Central Television. In the first part of the conversation, we need to talk about a state capture inquiry in South Africa. The second part of the report of the Justice Raymond Zondo report was handed over to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now it's time for us to switch gears.
Now, it's been a string of recent coups in West Africa in the past 18 months. And in similar scenes, military leaders have toppled the government of Mali, Chad, Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso, and in the latest attempt, Guinea-Bissau. Now, on Tuesday, gunfire erupted near government buildings in the capital of the West African nation, where the president was attending a cabinet meeting.
Now, President Umaru Sissoco Embalo, in a televised address, said he survived an attempted coup, but says many members of the security forces were killed, repelling what he described as an attack on democracy. He said the coup attempt was an attack against democracy. He said it was well prepared and organized and could be related to people involved in drug trafficking without giving no further details.
Na garanti comunidade internacional kuma per continuare com a Guiné-Bissau e per como manter sereno. E nós forças de defesa e segurança estão de parabéns. De facto, foi ato muito bem preparado e organizado. E que são militares que são esses. E tem também conivência e tem a ver no combate contra narcotráfico. Manda gente que são esses e gente que está sob investigação de narcotráfico. Agora, não tem uma noção como que preço que está pagando. Mas não está na conta.
Il y a eu des morts?
Oui, beaucoup de morts.
Et des arrestations aussi?
Hein?
Et des arrestations aussi?
Oui, on a déjà commencé.
Now, that is one very determined President, Umaru Sissoco Embalo, saying he would have preferred for them to come and face him. Now, Guinea-Bissau is one of the poorest countries in the world, and the former Portuguese colonies has seen 9 coups since 1980. Now, Now, joining us live to discuss this is the head research and monitoring desk, News Central TV, Abdulateef Ahmed. It's so good to have you join us on the conversation at this time.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the question making the rounds is, who is behind the attack? The president in the video clip showed earlier talked about, revealed his vigorous attempt to fight corruption and drug trafficking. And he said those who are involved in this are probably those involved in drug trafficking. So what do we make of this? Is the government being attacked by enemies of the state or the military as seen by other similar coups?
Well, when we take it from the understanding that Guinea-Bissau poses to us, first understand that Guinea-Bissau is a narco state, in Africa. Now, that offers us a window into the reality of that country. It has become that state where a transitory point for those who are involved in cross-border crimes, and therefore it has become unstable over the years. Because of that, it has witnessed a lot of coups or near-coup attempts, and therefore, when the president suggested that it was drug barons and people traffickers in drugs who were behind the attack, then we should be able to see connect the dots between what he has said and what the reality of the country is. But there's no doubt that a spillover from the activities around that region could be influencing the decision or the thought process of most of the military persons who have caused this recent uproar.
Thank you very much, Abdulateef. Looking at the recent political history of Guinea-Bissau, in 2020, President Mbalo was elected president, but it was widely contested and bitterly disputed, up to the extent that the opposition party actually named an interim president. You know how the political class works. I mean, coups could come from, looking at the picture of Guinea-Bissau, it could be from disgruntled drug barons. It could also emerge from the political class, or you can have disgruntled military, as we've seen in, like Rita clearly highlighted, in recent coups in Mali and Burkina Faso. Do you think there's any relationship between this and the recent attempted coup? Because a lot of people feel he's an illegitimate president.
Indeed, there's a nexus between the institutional framework conflicts in the country and the general sense of lack of involvement of certain persons within the political process. So you have the military on one hand who are in contest or challenging civil authorities, and then you have within the military, you have those who do not feel contented by the status quo. And therefore, when you look at what is happening, most of the officers who are challenging civilian governments are usually younger officers, not the superior officers or not the heads of the military institutions in these countries within the region. So you have people who feel disenchanted, who are disgruntled, or who feel disconnected with what's happening in the country, and therefore they take decisions that they feel is best for the country. Those institutional and structural issues with Guinea-Bissau are at the root of why this may be happening and the general instability, in the country.
Now, apart from political crisis, let's look at his administration. He said he has been trying to fight corruption and trafficking, and this is why there's an attempted coup on him. How would you rate his administration so far? Do you feel he has been, to an extent, since 2020, been able to curb the issue of drug trafficking, seeing Guinea-Bissau as a narco state, as you rightly said?
The indices has not improved so far. If you consider the CPI that was released recently and the rate at which the indices for drug trafficking and that of corruption, which I do say there's a nexus between both of them. The increase in instability in the region suggests that there will always be the need or the tendency for trafficking of drugs and all of that. Now, because there is little or no improvement in funding the police in the country, there is no improvement in the military, the naval forces in the country, and therefore you cannot expect that there will be an improvement in in the fight against drug trafficking in the country.
Now, Latif, the country has seen 9 coups or attempted coups since 1980. That's quite a number. How have this eroded democratic dividends, and do you think it's a contributory factor to the spate of coups that happen in the country? Like they're not so used to having stable democracies.
So most times what we have is an attempt to have a government that does not represent the true yearnings of the people. Now, why do I say that? When you consider the fact that Guinea-Bissau has had a lot of coup attempts and political crises, as the case may be, there has been ECOWAS intervention over the years that were supposed to have been implemented. One of such is the Conakry Agreement, which intends to ensure that everybody is carried along in the governance process and ensure that there is inclusivity, of the political blocks in all that happens in the country. However, we still realize that there's always, this conflict between the sitting president and the prime minister. Their powers seem to overlap, and therefore sometimes when there is a vacuum or there is a heat coming from the fact that certain persons feel there's an usurpation of power or there is a crossing of boundaries, that tension, that needless tension will go down within the governance structure, and it will affect how things are done. It will affect who do you take instructions from, who do you take command from, and how do you implement some of these instructions. And so that is at the center of why sometimes things don't go right in that country.
Now, you talked about ECOWAS now and talked about the political system in Guinea-Bissau. We know that due to a number of coups going on in Guinea-Bissau, we had even an ECOWAS division located in Guinea-Bissau. But as usual, we have seen reaction statements from international organizations. We saw the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, condemning the coup. But despite sanctions placed on countries with successful coups, we still have coups, attempted coups coming up in Guinea-Bissau. So do we say that international organizations have become less powerful and the opposition factors have become more powerful? What exactly is the problem there? Can ECOWAS or international organizations handle the situations of coups going on in a West African province?
I do not see how ECOWAS can handle issues around political power and political control in these countries. Yes, what you have most of the time are pronouncements. There's a coup attempt or there's a coup, then you have pronouncement. However, in the process that leads towards governance, in the process that leads towards the emergence of certain persons within the political space, ECOWAS doesn't seem to play much roles. And that is why when it comes to the head, what happens is there's a tough war between contending forces, and then ECOWAS makes pronouncement. However, the intervention of ECOWAS over the years, like having a, a unit of armed men stationed in that country, it was meant to intervene if anything pops up. It is meant to keep some level of sanity and control and protection, for Guinea-Bissau. In spite of that, it has remained fragile because the structure does not allow for distribution of wealth in the country. I mean, as of 2020, over 72% of that country is considered poor. People who are poor have a tendency to be angry, and those who are angry have a tendency to obstruct the flow, of governance. So that is what we have in that country.
Now, quickly, before we wrap up, in 1 minute, Latif, what's the future for President Embalo? We do know he's a former brigadier in the army of Guinea-Bissau. And when coups happen, when they're unsuccessful, as we've seen in Turkey with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, presidents tend to use this excuse to purge the military or purge their political opponents. Paint a picture of what you see the next few weeks happening in Guinea-Bissau.
Yes, as an intelligence officer and one who is grounded in military culture, I will assume, or I will think strongly, that he will purge the military and restructure it in ways that he feels are safer for the country and not just safe for himself. Because there's always a temptation for democratic governments to have people who are simply loyal to them and not to the country. When you have that, it still goes down within the structure that you can have internal revolt within the army, and then the center will not hold any longer. So what I see going forward is that there will be a purging of the military structure, and probably he will become more open to involving opposition in his government and see how it moves from there onwards.
But if you look at what has been happening now, can you say that we're going back to the Africa coup belt days?
Come again? I didn't get that.
I think looking at the surge of coups going on in the West African region, can we say we are going back to the Africa coup belt days?
Well, it's an infection, I would say, that countries are getting more infected by the day because the concerns are almost the same. So you have a current running across West Africa at the moment. The feeling, the sentiment is almost the same. You have a lot of people who are generally more exposed to affairs of the world, and then people who are able to say, this we deserve better, we could have better. However, you cannot tell when or why these things happen unless you take a good look as to how the political process is evolved. Because the outcome, simply having a civilian president is not enough. The process of getting a civilian president is as important as getting a civilian president. So when you have just a cabal or a few people in the country in charge of the resources of the country, what it means is that the more they continue to force themselves or that little group of elites on the people, the more resentment, the more disagreement, the more tendency for them to want these people out of government.
Thank you very much, Abdulateef Ahmed. We do appreciate your insights, Abdulateef Ahmed, as the head of research and monitoring at News Central TV. Thanks for joining us on this conversation on Guinea-Bissau. And this is where we draw the curtains on today's show. It's been quite an engaging one. In part one, we did speak about the Zondo Commission report.
Yes, the second volume of the Zondo Commission. And in the second part, we talked about the attempted coup going on in Guinea-Bissau. And our fingers are crossed because, as the Prime Minister said, it was not just a coup, it was an attempt to kill the president. So we'll see how far this goes. So do join us again on Wednesday, 5 p.m. on Friday, West Africa time. Seems like the time is just going slowly for another edition of The Conversation.
Bye-bye.